Authorities in North China's Inner Mongolia last week admitted to inflating its 2016 industrial output and fiscal revenue by 40% and 26% respectively. How will this impact its local economic autonomy and China's national statistics? The northeastern Liaoning Province also made a similar confession last January, quoting its cities and counties had fabricated fiscal data between 2011 and 2014. How rampant is falsifying data among these underdeveloped provinces? A recent video clip of Mao Junhua, the chairman of a Yabuli ski resort in China's Heilongjiang province, went viral after he accused a local management authority of using power to edge out private companies through asset seizures and unreasonable police investigations. Is a level playing field missing? As the industrial base for the early years of the PRC, the northeastern area has been suffering from economic decline in recent decades. What are the reasons behind its decline, and why is it so hard for the government to rejuvenate the region?
Last week, the government of Inner Mongolia said its industrial output figure for 2016 should be revised down by 40%, and its fiscal revenue for that year was 26% less than initially stated. Liaoning Province in northeastern China also made a similar announcement last year. Why did these provinces severely inflate their economic data? What are the problems in China's northeastern part as the country pledges to rejuvenate the once powerful industrial region? And how will China address this local government debt and rejuvenate what is China's Rust Belt? To discuss these issues and more, and today joined in the studio by Andy Mock, Managing Director of Red Pagoda Resources, and Dr. Hunai Jin from the School of Public Policy and Management at the University of Chinese Academy of Sciences. We shall also be speaking to Robert Kapp, Director of the Economist Corporate Network via satellite. He's standing by in Hong Kong. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Are you surprised by the Xinhua News report that the government of Inner Mongolia recently said its industrial output figure for 2016 should be revised down by 40%? I mean, this is appallingly shocking.
Well, yes, 40% of revisation is such a shocking decision, shocking news. As a matter of fact, I think it is the industrial output that is revised, because in the calculations and the statistics of GDP, the industrial sector is a very complicated one, because there is the distinguishment between medium goods and final goods and value added, etc., etc. So, from technological points of view, there should be some errors. But the error should be less than 10%. That can be called an error. And this is a 40% change. It must be a mistake. So I'm afraid from technological point of view, we can't explain this 40% of change. So it must be some kind of man-made mistakes.
You are being very polite. You sound like a diplomat. Is it just a mistake? Many would point out it could be a crime.
Well, I would say that I'm not surprised at all, because I think that as long as there have been books, meaning accounting records, there's also been tremendous incentives to cook the books, meaning to misstate them, to make them look better than they are.
Is it a common practice for enterprises to cook the sheets?
Well, I think it's not as uncommon as we might think, and we only need to look back at some of the major crises in the last 20, 30 years, Enron, Arthur Andersen, most recently PwC. All were exposed for misstating corporate numbers. At the municipal level in the U.S., this happens also as well. So I think that in China, and also given the more centralized political system here in China, that there's tremendous pressure to deliver your numbers. So in a way, it's not that different from publicly traded markets in the U.S., that they're under enormous pressure to deliver the earnings per share growth that the market is looking for. And that pressure, both the greed and the fear, I think, creates enormous psychological incentives to misstate numbers. Maybe they're not technical reasons, but whether they're crimes or not, I think depend on the degree of the misstatements, and ultimately it's a legal question on intent as well.
Let me cross over to Robert. Hello.
Hi, Yang Rui.
Underdevelopment of Inner Mongolia shouldn't be a front-page story for many of us who are aware that the resource curse of Inner Mongolia and the seriously flawed economic structure of that autonomous region shouldn't be a big surprise. However, Liaoning Province is a place where many of the senior government officials once worked, and it's of course one of the major provinces and heavy industrial bases. So what went wrong with the economic figure? I'm talking about the accuracy of the official statistics concerning the economic performance of this major province, Liaoning. Can you tell us your idea, your thoughts about the economic structure in these three provinces in China's Dongbei, Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning? Previously, we were talking about Inner Mongolia. Inner Mongolia could be part of Dongbei, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're all related in the sense of having large dependency on natural resources and heavy industry. Inner Mongolia really is dependent on coal. In Liaoning and Jilin provinces, you have a combination of coal and then heavy industry, also some manufacturing. But to your specific question on what went wrong with Liaoning province, I think, and that was something that came up, of course, this time last year, it was a matter of the officials just feeling the need to rectify things. As you know, the current president of China, Mr. Xi Jinping, has been very adamant in drawing things into line across the board in business and government. And moreover, we've actually seen on an economic from an economic standpoint in terms of statistics, there has been an increased efficiency in reporting data. So I think they had a combination of factors, both the political pressure as well as just the fact that more and more provinces are reporting accurately, and it's been the Northeast that's kind of been the holdout in this case. So I believe then the last one we've probably seen the biggest rectification this year being with Inner Mongolia. That'll probably be the end of it, I would think, going forward, because you've got more and more of these provinces that were outliers now in line.
Thank you for briefing us on your thoughts on the lackluster performance or underdevelopment in Liaoning. We'll come back to address the poor broad picture about the Dongbei economic development. But earlier, you said technical errors could only account for 10% of the statistics, but why 40%? Let's first of all look at the details of the technical statistics. You're an expert in this particular area. Please enlighten us with your professional knowledge on this topic, the error, so to speak.
Okay. From the errors point of view, for example, as we all know that GDP, gross domestic product, is the statistics of the total goods and services that is produced in a period in the local region. And during this process, for example, if goods and services were purchased by a factory or a company that is in industry sector, but the value of this kind of goods and services will be added to the final goods that will be purchased by the consumers, not factory and the
Sounds like tongue twister for a layman like me.
Yes, that's right. But if you calculate both, for example, the goods and services purchased by the factory companies or by the individual consumers, then this kind of goods and services may be calculated 2 times or 3 times or more times if the trade process is more complicated. So in the GDP statistics, there's only the final goods that should be taken into consideration. But how to distinguish final goods and medium goods is very difficult. So in the real GDP statistics, there is a very interesting one called value-added statistics, and it's interrelated with value-added tax. So I think there is a kind of check and balance. For example, a province will say, I have a very strong GDP growth, and then you should also have a tax growth about value-added tax. So if you have less GDP growth, you can't have less tax, especially on value-added tax. So this kind of tax and the GDP make a check and balance process. And I also see a statistics about different regions about GDP and the tax. I can see clearly that some regions' GDP is very big, but the tax is very small. So we can see the problems and difficulties in this kind of statistics.
Are you suggesting that there are some human arrows, so to speak, that took advantage of the ambiguity deliberately to cook the book and to impress their boss in the hope of being promoted through office politics, and of course what we call 政绩观
That's right.
outlook about your office politics.
Because as we all know that there are some kind of performance evaluation to different officials. And in this evaluation, GDP is the major indicator of the performance. And sometimes the tax may be added to this, but GDP is one of the most important indicator. So I think if you ask me a suggestion, I will say we should take GDP and the tax into consideration at the same time, so that every region, if you want to say we have more GDP, then you will have more tax. Without any more tax, your GDP is not real. So I think if we take GDP and the tax, especially value-added tax, into consideration at the same time, then there's a kind of check and balance to the GDP statistics.
Inner Mongolia, or the 3 provinces in China's northeastern part, do not always come across as the failure, so to speak. For example, between the year 2003 and 2013, we did enjoy a boom of the local economy. And that's part of the rosy picture that impressed the rest of the world concerning China's rapid economic expansion. However, the issue of local debt, overcapacity, for example, today is increasingly viewed as a burden and a drag on the economy. So what do you think of measures to be rolled out in handling the legacy of the past the golden decade or whatever? It is a, we are paying price for the rapid expansion, aren't we?
I think we are, and there's 2 factors at work here. So one is just the cyclical nature of booms and busts. So there's overcapacity that needs to be either taken offline, somehow reabsorbed. But I think there's also structural issues going on here as well. And I think this is exactly why during the 19th Party Congress that President Xi pointed out that unbalanced development is one of the biggest challenges facing China today. And it's important not just for economics, but also for social stability, because we need to only look at the United States, where we see now this greater polarization, and the roots of that polarization, I think one can say, is largely economic, in that the East Coast and the West Coast moved ahead income-wise, culture-wise, and middle America was left behind, and that has contributed to this unhealthy political dynamic that we're seeing in the United States. So I think that this issue, rightly so, is front and center of the government's efforts to sustain China's growth and prosperity.
Robert, here is a very sensitive issue about the future of the SOE in Dongbei, which is known for the heavy industry since the founding of the PRC, and due to the benefits of the first 5-year plan, and during that period of the first 5 years, we enjoyed massive economic assistance from the former Soviet Union, hence the glow of the success in the past. Right. Today is a different story. President Xi Jinping visited the Liaoning delegation during the plenary session of the NPC last year, and he asked local authorities to prioritize the future of the SOE and the real economy. However, economists and overseas observers have been pretty skeptical about the resilience and the future of the SOE, saying due to the issue of overcapacity and poor efficiency, a lot of the employees of those SOE segments will be made redundant very quickly and ruthlessly. What do you think of their prediction?
Unfortunately, that has a lot of validity. When you have industries like steel, I mentioned the natural resource dependence in the Northeast and the heavy industry dependence that you also laid out there going back to the time of the first 5-year plan. I mean, heavy industries made sense half a century ago, and they don't so much now. But if you have a whole area dependent on that, and it's in a down cycle and facing increased competition from all over the world, you have to look very seriously at what you do with reducing the excess capacity. The physical excess capacity is shutting down the plants and so forth is relatively easy, although costly. Your bigger issue is what to do with the workers. And as Andy was just pointing out, we've seen what that can have in terms of even very well more socially stable economies like the United States, where there's a higher level of personal income among those workers. If you have workers who aren't as well paid and now facing layoffs and no job prospects, that's a huge issue. So it means a lot of retraining. It also just means having a social safety net. Older workers probably can't be retrained as easily or maybe even at all, and there has to be an easy way to ease them out of the workforce and make sure they're not suffering.
Job creation and social security program should be measures to be taken by not only local authorities but the central government as part of their huge campaign to improve the well-being of the livelihoods for the locals. That's why President Xi Jinping vowed not to leave a single Chinese national behind the campaign of poverty alleviation. And he made remarks at the opening ceremony of the 19th National Congress. But what about the economic transformation? What do you think of the future of Dongbei, other than job creation and training, so to speak? Robert?
Well, Dongbei is actually very interesting as an area. I should confess that I had some projects involved there before. Previously had actually worked on some funding prospects for the Yabuli ski resort, which has been in the news recently. And before that, with the CITIC group, had looked at some opportunities in Qiqihar, which is just on the border with Russia. And it's a beautiful area with everything from ski resorts to hot springs to just fantastic vistas. So it's not just an area that can only rely on coal and the heavy industry it's had in the past. It could be developed into a really beautiful tourist area, I think, but that requires lots of investment, lots of, like you were just talking about in your remarks there, retraining for workers and a shift to a service-oriented economy.
There is a popular assumption that went viral on the internet concerning the future of making further investment in Dongbei. That assumption says it is unwise to make investment beyond Shanghai Guan or in northeastern part of China. In our careful review of the local conditions for the investment, in other words, in our review of the local business environment, there are tons of problems. We are both from Dongbei, right?
That's right.
We are quite familiar with the local culture. It is therefore very difficult for us to severely criticize our own hometown and the culture that comes along. But today, I'm a journalist, you're an economist.
Yes.
Let's put aside our feelings and affections for the hometown. Let's look at the issue square and talk about very brutal challenges. So what went wrong with the business environment?
Well, I think I should focus on the government itself. That is to say, if we are going to talk about investment environment, the bureaucracy in the northeast region of China shouldn't be neglected. In this region, I think the process of any kind of government's approval maybe take a longer time. So if you want to make an investment, the bureaucracy hierarchy of the government is so complicated that it can't be compared with the regions in southern areas.
It might be an exaggeration to say that there are more government officials than the population of consumers in these three provinces.
Not only the numbers, but also the process.
The overstaffed bureaucratic apparatus could be a heavy drag on the local economy and
Yes.
could be huge bureaucratic red tapes.
Yes, that's right. For example, if you want to take administrative approval of any kind of investment, it will take, for example, several working days in southern areas, such as in Shanghai or in Hangzhou. But in northeastern regions, it will take you more than 1 month. So I think the bureaucracy and the red tape, as you have mentioned, is one important issue in this region. And I think the second difficulty in investment environment is about sometimes of the neglecting of the laws and the rules. The people in this region may pay too much attention on human relationships. Sometimes they neglect the rules and the laws. So this is, I think, a second problem we have to face. But as we all know that this kind of bureaucracy and the neglection of laws and rules are contributed to the traditions and the culture. So I think it's not easy to change it in a day's time. It will take a long time to have a new transition of people's ideologies, of people's considerations, etc., etc.
What are your thoughts about the chronic problems concerning the local culture, qualifications of the human resources, relationship between the government and the market? And it is a sensitive issue to look at mafia. When Mu Suixin, the former mayor of Shenyang, capital city of Liaoning Province, was disgracefully exposed in a corruption scandal. Along with that came Ma Xiangdong, who went to Macau for the casino industry. He squandered millions of RMB there. And they were involved in a scandal with the local mafia chief, Liu Yong. We both come from Dongbei. We know the deep-rooted problem of this. But let's look at the bureaucratic red tapes.
Well, I'm not from Dongbei, so, but I can maybe offer an outsider's and perhaps a more of an American perspective on this. I think that, well, certainly bureaucracy and red tape is a tax on business and makes business less appealing. I think that being said, I'm a big believer in the fundamental ingenuity of business people, especially small business people, and where there's money to be made, people will find a way. An example of successfully operating in a lawless society or a lawless area. Back in the 1800s in the U.S. during the gold rush, in places like Montana, there was no state government, there was no police, and yet people went there and they self-organized, not exactly mafia, but it was more or less rule by force, and there were certain town bosses that enforced both physical order as well as commercial order. So I don't necessarily see lawlessness as categorically inimical or making successful economic activity impossible. I think that's one point to make. But I think the important thing, culture, I think does matter, but I think that what's more important is people have to see some way to make money. So that was gold in the gold rush. During the 1800s in the United States. We see a lot of this activity with Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies today. Whenever there's an opportunity to make a lot of money, people will come rushing in. The last example I would make, you mentioned the mafia. There are a lot of criminal businesses, whether they're the drug cartels or the mafia, the Italian mafia in the United States, that also run incredibly profitable businesses. So I think that it is a factor. But it may not completely explain the inability of Dongbei to keep up with the really, staggering economic growth in other parts of China, particularly in the south of China.
A mafia story could be a good inspiration for movies, Hollywood movies and blockbusters. Robert, Dongbei is unfortunately blessed by two underdeveloped countries. One is Russia, the other DPRK. And therefore, other than the issue of the weather severity during the winter, people from Dongbei say, hey, let's go to Sanya, Hainan to enjoy the sunshine. Do you believe in the foreseeable future the three provinces in Dongbei, Heilongjiang, Jilin, and Liaoning, are likely to become the Far East Siberia of Russia, meaning they will be outsourced? There will be no competitive labor force.
Well, to that point, I think that what Dongbei can rely on is value add. So I know that in trips I've made to Harbin and what I hear from Chinese friends who are active there, you still see a very robust trade, for example, with Russia, because whether it's Chinese buying Russian furs or Chinese exporting manufactured goods to Russia, China still has a better organized economy, even in a more impoverished area like Dongbei, compared to what Russia has in Siberia. So that's actually to its advantage. But whether it's Russia or North Korea, you could say indeed there isn't as great an advantage with proximate economies to Dongbei like you see in the south. So Guangdong famously being next to Hong Kong, where I am now, and a very prospering Chinese city when Guangdong was beginning to open up and reform. It obviously had huge advantages with its ties to Hong Kong, which you do not see in Dongbei. You see just the opposite in terms of having laggard economies. But nevertheless, those are business opportunities for entrepreneurial Chinese business people, and I think they are currently taking advantage of them. They just need to go further, and they need to do other things, like we said, in terms of restructuring the economy to make sure it's more modern and not reliant on dying industries.
What do you think? What do you think of the alleged bleak future of Dongbei, since, as I said earlier, it shares border with the DPRK in Russia, and human resources will be outsourced. Elites, well-educated people would prefer to work in the more prosperous region, the more developed coastal areas in eastern China, and therefore the population is getting old. Economic structure lags behind. External growth, Russia and DPRK. I mean, if you put these negative factors into your one perspective, do you have a very gloomy picture?
Well, currently speaking, that if you see the pension funds of the northeastern region, especially for Heilongjiang Province, it is an indicator of the pictures we are describing. For example, there is about hundreds of billions of RMB debt in the pension funds in Heilongjiang Province, and the labor force is decreasing and the elder population's number is increasing. This is very obvious. But as to the future, we can say that there are several uncertainties about future. For example, yes, this northeastern region has the neighbor of Russia. But as we all know that during the project of One Belt and Road project in China, Russia is the most important cooperator with China in this project. So if this region can take this chance of Belt and Road project, there may be growth opportunities for this region. So I think
what if oil prices go up dramatically? That would be a curse for the future of the northeastern economic performance. The last question is very much about the resilience, and you know, given the pervasive note of pessimism concerning the future of Dongbei, what is your therapy?
Well, to look at the U.S. for two quick examples, we can look at Wheeling, West Virginia, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that were both the Silicon Valleys of their day. Now, one staged a fairly successful turnaround, that's Pittsburgh, so they had a renaissance. Wheeling has not, and by all indications probably won't. The big difference is that Pittsburgh has a major research university, Carnegie Mellon University there, as well as some other universities. So I think in terms of a potential remedy, of course, Dongbei as a region is enormous. I think it makes more sense to not even talk about a province, but maybe a city, whether that's, you know, Shenyang or Harbin or, you know, any of these other major cities, and think about it more at the municipal level. But you need an economic engine, and typically to make the transition from an industrial economy to an information economy and a post-information economy, those tend to be world-class research institutions. Or you need an economic anchor, and sometimes in the US at least, these are hospitals. So they provide decent, stable, relatively well-paying jobs that provide the economic ballast. So at least you can maintain standards of living, if not be at the forefront, but at least you won't fall too far behind. So I think those are two things that perhaps Dongbei can think about.
Yeah. Perhaps a role model to be followed is the success of the economy in Ruhr Valley in Germany, which has undergone a dramatic restructuring away from its original coal and steel-based economy to a more diversified service economy. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue on the bleak future of Dongbei. Maybe other people would give a different view on the prospects of the Dongbei economic performance. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.